The Internet of Things is a real problem for a lot of us, and we're using it for things like our security cameras, our thermostats on the walls. We're hooking our TVs up to it so we can stream video. What are the things you need to do before you get that security camera? These devices that we're adding to our networks are actually computers. You consider what's in one of these security cameras or that wonderful little Google Nest thermostat that you have on the wall. Both of those have computing power that exceeds what put men on the moon. Well, at least the computer that was on board. They've got gigabytes of storage on them without a doubt. And maybe they have megabytes, still bigger than what was on the Apollo 11 spacecraft. And they're running an operating system. Now, Apollo 11 had the advantage of not being hooked up to a network because they didn't really exist back then, right? 1969, not so much. There were certainly some networks around, but nobody was attacking them. I can remember in the early days when I was starting to use the ARPANET and, the internet as it's called today. And I was just shocked when somebody decided they would release a worm, the Morris worm, and it crawled through email servers all over the internet. It was absolutely ridiculous. So there you go. A security researcher proving that there were holes in the cybersecurity because we trusted each other. And if you get right down to the protocols that we're running today, the TCP protocols, the email protocols known as SMTP or IMAP or POP, and now there's some other ones out there, but SMTP particularly, they actually speak English to each other, these computers. They say hello, or they kind of mess the letters around a little bit too for the more advanced stuff, but they say hello to each other. They tell you when there's text coming, etc. It's because it was designed for people to be able to debug, people to be able to implement. And even though it took some more bytes, some more data stream to send HELO as opposed to sending maybe 1 or 2 bytes, and those bytes represented some sort of a character that would then be used, or some sort of a value then be used to figure out what needed to happen there, they decided, let's be friendly. And that's what it was all about. We used to have so much fun back in the 80s, particularly the early 80s, messing around online, sending fun stuff back and forth, right? Nowadays, I might call it memes and things. The kids think they created those, but no, they've been around for a very long time, even before the networks were really all hooked up together. But we have a problem today because many people kind of have the same philosophy. Early internet, it was we're all working together, we're all doing this together, and we kind of self-policed, and bad guys stayed off of it. It was pretty complicated, and there weren't too many bad guys trying to get on. Fast forward, we started having computers that were accessible via dial-up modem. I remember how excited I was when we went from 110 baud to 300 baud, right? 110 bits per second. You could watch the characters come up one at a time on the screen, or in my case, on a teletype, TTY-33s. And today, of course, we're talking about gigabits. I've got gigabits coming into my office, multiple gigabits over a fiber link. So different, isn't it? So if I have a computer that is exposed on my network, am I going to get hacked? That's the big question, right? Well, if you're hooking your computer directly up to the internet and you don't have a firewall that's doing NATing, which is a network address translation, if you don't have that firewall there, then yeah, you're going to get scanned. Believe me, you're going to get scanned multiple times per hour, sometimes multiple times per minute as they try and figure out who are you, what are you, what kind of a device is this, have you changed the username, the password, etc. And of course, they're going to find out in most cases that you haven't. But the reality is the only device you have that's facing the internet, that's directly accessible from the internet, typically, is your firewall. So step 1, make sure that firewall has a new password and a new account. Change it from admin, right, where the username is admin and the password is admin, to something unique. Most of these firewalls, you can change your username. You can definitely change your password. And that makes it harder for people to break in. Now, of course, there can be bugs in that firewall software. We've seen that again and again and again. So that the bad guys can exploit a bug, often what's called a buffer overrun, but expose a bug and then use that bug to now take over your firewall. And man, have we seen that before, where they're redirecting you using DNS from your firewall and just doing all kinds of nasty things to you. It's a bad thing to see. So you're thinking, okay, so I've got that firewall. I changed my username on the firewall. I changed the password. I bought the firewall. And you know what? I am constantly watching for patches coming out. I've got my CVE table. I check it every day. I go online and I check, right? Of course, well, you don't, but let's say you did. Here's the other side of that problem. Your security cameras are not hooked up directly to the internet, correct? You're hooking them up to your local area network. It might be your Wi-Fi that's there in your small business or your house. Okay, how can you watch the video? Can you watch the video from your iPhone or your Android device, whatever it might be, your smartphone? Can you watch it when you're out of the business, when you are at home? Or if you're at home and you've got them hooked up at home, can you watch the video when you're on the road? I bet the answer is yes. Well, how can you do that? You see, if that firewall is protecting everything on your network from the mean, nasty, cruel world that's out there, how can you get through that firewall to your security cameras? Well, there's a couple of typical ways. Some of these security cameras want you to go in and make a configuration change on your firewall so that if they connect to it, in other words, if you connect to it using your phone to connect to your firewall at the house, it will then pass that data on through to your camera. There's a UPnP protocol which you don't want to use, but everybody does, and it's turned on your firewall. So now you are getting through your firewall, and your firewall is typically directing all of that traffic directly to your camera. So now the bad guys can not only try and hack your firewall, but they can try and hack your camera. You see how this works? If you can get to your camera from outside your network, there's two ways. I just explained the first way, which is you've made a change to your firewall, or in some cases, the camera might have requested a change to your firewall. So the second way, you're asking, what's that second way, Craig? Well, that camera may be poking a hole out of your firewall. Okay, well, heck, that's what you're doing when you're web browsing, right? You're making a little hole. You're getting out to the internet, and the internet is sending you data back, correct? Right? When you go to craigpeterson.com, craigpeterson.com server sends you back everything for the homepage, correct? So you've got a request going out through your firewall, and you've got a request coming back, the answer coming back in from your firewall, from the internet. So there is a way out and back in. So that camera may be connecting to a server out on the internet through your firewall, and now it is creating what you might call a virtual private network. So the camera is now streaming your video, whether it's a Ring camera or one of these Hikvision cameras. It's streaming your video through your firewall to the internet, and in many cases is also providing access from the internet, particularly from that cloud server, to your camera. Well, if that's happening and your camera gets hacked somehow, something happens to your camera, then what? Well, if they can hack your camera, if they can hack the website that your camera is talking to, they are in. And we've seen that before. I've seen small businesses that have bought these security cameras, the Hikvision, which you should not be buying, and they set it up so it's pointing at the cash register. So you can see if the employees are giving themselves a few extra tips on this side. Or you might be using it for the baby monitor. All of this stuff gets sent out to the internet using method number 2. And your security camera, your wonderful little thermostat, and Google got caught with putting a microphone hidden secretly inside your thermostat. Yeah, that Google thermostat that you have. They didn't tell anybody there was a microphone in there. They eventually enabled it. They wanted you to be able to talk to it and give it commands, apparently is what they were doing. But, if it gets hacked, you've got a microphone there. Same thing with your Alexa. Although Amazon was very upfront about, hey, yeah, of course they have microphones. You're going to talk to them, give them commands. And they've done a pretty good job of security, I will say. But a company that's been making security cameras for 50 years may not be a company that knows much about the cyber security side. Are your cameras getting patches? Are they configured properly? Did you change the username and password on your cameras for the network? So the very first question you really need to ask yourself is, do I actually need a security camera? And what's the pedigree of the company? What kind of risks do I have by putting this in? We use Cisco security cameras, and we're pretty comfortable with them. They get updates frequently, and I am storing all of the video locally. Hey, visit me online, craigpeterson.com. Make sure you sign up for my free weekly newsletter and get this article and a whole lot more. We've talked about this so-called green energy, the woke movement and how they're going to be absolutely wonderfully green. Well, it turns out that it is a nightmare, and frankly, it is anything but green. There's a great article that was in my newsletter that came out on Monday, and it's from WhatsApp, W-A-T-T-S, whatsappwiththat.com. Kind of a cool website. It's had 500 billion hits. Oh, I hate those off by 1,000 problems. Well, this is just incredible because they are breaking down what is actually needed in order for us to be able to move into what the left is calling green energy. In reality, when we're talking about green energy, what we're talking about is moving the pollution from my backyard, where I'm driving my wonderful electric car. I'm plugging it in at night. Moving the pollution from your backyard to other people's backyards. People who cannot afford it. People who are poor, who are far below even subsistence levels in some of these countries. So he goes through this very, very carefully here in this article. Again, it's in Monday's newsletter. If you missed that, just email me, emmy@craigpeterson.com. Let me know what you're looking for, and I will be happy to send it out for you. Well, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, you might remember, he made a deal with Senator Manchin. They had the 50-50 Senate trying to enact this spending extravaganza called the Reduction Act. And what it is primarily is a massive spending bill on what they're calling climate and green energy subsidy. So it's giving Senator Schumer's allies some $370 billion. Your dollars, my dollars. And I don't care if you don't pay a penny in tax. Because what happens when they're spending money like this, $370 billion, yet another, right? Who cares? $370 billion is it increases inflation. And inflation is a hidden tax. I just saw some numbers that came out, and they were showing that your buying power has dropped by 3%, and prices have gone up about 8% in the last year. So you're looking at that $100 bill you could have spent last year is now worth about $90. And we're not even going to talk about how they changed the way they compute the numbers to make us look like, oh, it's only the worst in 40 years. Okay. In reality, the inflation is the worst ever. So it doesn't matter. Don't pay a dime in taxes. You're still paying because of inflation. If nothing else, inflation is the hidden tax that the government uses in order to decrease the actual current value of the debt. Economics, right? Ask AOC. She'll know. She's got a degree in economics from Boston College, I think it was. Anyways, so Manchin voted yay on that, because Schumer had agreed to, okay, we'll get your bill here in front of the Senate and we'll make this all move. Because, of course, Manchin's from a state that has a lot of coal production. I think they have some oil there too, right? So it didn't go anywhere. His bill, Manchin's bill, right? Oh, Schumer's passed, right? What the heck? It's only $370 billion in wind, solar, battery, and other funding. But bottom line here, it's a good thing that Manchin's didn't pass, because there's all kinds of other things in there. We're not getting into that right now. But the Wall Street Journal and energy analyst Robert Bryce observed that Manchin's reforms would give the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and other bureaucrats the power to issue permits for states to acquiesce to new transmission lines, 200-foot tall towers across scenic habitat, agricultural, even residential lands. If a business even asks for an extension of a power grid because they've got a few windmills, think of that, right? Windmills in the middle of nowhere, they are obliged to put that into the grid. It's just crazy. So in that case, the feds could be decreeing thousands of miles of new transmission lines in the national interest, right? So absolutely amazing. So anyways, the Biden administration is looking to stop man-made climate change, which, by the way, is minimal. Absolutely minimal. You know, the climate change is the only constant the Earth has had since it was, you know, what, millions, billions of years ago, right? It's always been changing. You remember something about an ice age and a mini ice age just a few hundred years ago? Remember in the 70s, I think it was Time magazine had that front page story about how we're entering an ice age. We have to start spreading black oil up there in the Arctic and the Antarctic to absorb more heat from the sun, and that's going to solve us all. Science, people, science. Thank goodness we didn't do something quite that stupid. So let's look at FERC here, that wonderful federal agency, and let's have a look at our friends in New York State, right? So New York's peak summertime needs, we're talking about here, New York, just New York alone, would require 2,500 680-foot tall, 12-megawatt offshore turbines operating 24/7. Now, in reality, we'd be lucky if they generate electricity 40% of the year, okay? And of course, we know NIMBY, right? Not in my backyard. You can't possibly put windmills off the Cape and islands, right? No, you can't do that. But they'll be glad to put them in front of your house. Don't worry about that one, right? This just drives me absolutely crazy. So the feds would be able to ride roughshod over states, your local communities, the whole concept of federalism that was part of course, the founding, Jeffersonian, right? Wind and sunshine are free. Wind and sunshine are absolutely green. They're renewable, although I don't think that's quite the right word. And they're obviously sustainable. But harnessing becomes the wonderful wind and sunshine becomes unreliable. It's weather-dependent energy, and it's not something we can count on to power civilization. Now, we know that. Okay, we've known that for a long time. So let's take a look at New York a little bit more, okay? Those 2,500 wind turbines for New York electricity generating 30,000 megawatts. That's a lot of power, but that's what they need. And of course, 60% of the year, they wouldn't have any electricity. Who needs it, right? Especially in the winter, you don't need electricity, right? But anyways, it would require nearly 110,000 tons of copper. Now, that means mining, crushing, processing, refining 25 million tons of copper ore. And that's only going to happen after removing 40 million tons of overlying rock to reach the ore bodies. And we're just talking about the copper. Think about this. All of those diesel trucks, all those diggers, all of that blasting, all of the overburden that has to be moved and then put back. Remember how much we're talking about here? 40 million tons of overburden? How about the processing plants, the factories? How many would we need? How much fossil fuel power to run all of those operations? How many thousands of square miles of toxic waste pits all over the world under zero to minimal environmental standards? Right? Because we're not going to do it here. Not in my backyard. It's green because look at my car. I don't see anything come out of the tailpipe. How about the workplace safety standards, child, slave labor rules? They don't have them in the places that we're getting some of these raw materials. Oh, and how would all of this survive hurricanes like Ian or Andrew? They wouldn't. I'm online at craigpeterson.com. Visit me now. We're going to pick up on a couple of more of those green energy things. I wasn't able to finish it just a minute ago, but there is some crazy stuff going on. Plus, we're going to get into some spooky stuff here. What's the CIA been up to? You might remember a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about the problem California is having right now with solar panels. They really pushed these 20 years ago. They provided a whole bunch of funding, everything else for them, and a lot of people put these up on the roofs. We're talking about, California, millions of people. Well, what did we say? Well, they're coming down now. And they're coming down off the roofs because their life cycle is over. So what's happening with them? Well, it's illegal to recycle all of those solar panels in California. You can't recycle them there. So they're sending them out of state to be recycled. And not all of those are getting recycled either. These things are going into storage. And at least 10% of them are going into the landfills. Remember, solar panels are not green. They contain heavy metals that will contaminate the water supply. But they're ending up in the trash. What about all of the rest of the green energy trash? Where's that going to end up? So we've got a lot of people refusing to address all of these problems that were brought up in this article. And you'll find it in my newsletter this week. It's a great little article. I'm quoting extensively from it here. But they're saying that people are actively suppressing, canceling, censoring, deplatforming any questions and discussions about these types of issues. It's just incredible. Bottom line is there will not be, there cannot be enough mines, metals, and minerals on the entire planet to reach any net zero U.S. economy by 2050, which is the Biden administration goal, much less a global green economy. Okay, now here's another issue. Remember Hurricane Ian that hit? People in Florida have electric cars, just like they do in other states. They're not everybody's driving electric down there. But electric vehicles and backup lithium-ion batteries, which you need in order to provide your home with power if you're relying on solar panels, for instance. Well, there's some others, I get it, right? There's some new iron-type batteries and things. But as a rule, we're talking about backup lithium-ion batteries, particularly if you're getting those battery packs from our friends at Tesla. Well, both the vehicles and the battery modules for your backup power can erupt spontaneously into these chemical-fueled infernos. We have seen this happen already. And those infernos cannot be extinguished by conventional firefighting means. So this is a real problem, because we now need to treat every electric vehicle and every backup battery system as if it's loaded and ready to ignite. Never park an electric vehicle, install a power wall, or locate a backup power facility near anything you are not prepared to have destroyed. So that means don't park your electric car in your garage. Don't park it near other vehicles. In fact, we've had warnings from some manufacturers as they found defects in their battery packs. Some manufacturers saying, yeah, don't ever park the electric car in your garage. Bring it in. We'll fix it for you, right? Don't park them near other vehicles, in parking garages. Don't park your electric car under an apartment building, office buildings. Don't park them in residential neighborhoods, highway tunnels, or on cargo ships like the Felicity Ace. Okay? Be very, very careful, because we are not ready for any of this yet. This is insanity. This is not science. Okay? So the Felicity Ace, in case you didn't know, was a cargo carrier. And it went down with thousands of Porsches and Volkswagens aboard. So obviously it's going to be bad news for any marine organisms in the area. Well, now we've got electric car batteries and tanks of oil and gas at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, around 2 miles down, a couple hundred miles from the Azores. Portuguese Navy had to go out, and this was 2022, by the way, and break up a small oil patch at the surface of the water. But it's very, very concerning, because these electric batteries are going to degrade. They have a lot of power in them. Have you ever noticed that the airlines will not let you on board with a large battery pack? So there's a maximum size of an external battery you can bring with you on the airline because of this very problem. They have caught fire before. It's just amazing. March 1st, 2022, the car carrier Felicity Ace sank below the waves near the Portuguese Azores archipelago. So they're worried about all the pollution and what's going to happen here. We've got lithium down there too, which is highly toxic. Frankly, the fuel isn't as bad. If you look at the Gulf of Mexico, the amount of oil that leaks naturally into the Gulf of Mexico, not including the big Exxon leaks there, and we could get into the causes of that too, but not including that, it leaks as much oil as that Exxon leak with all of those millions of barrels of oil. It's constantly leaking, but that oil is digested by certain microbes there in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, that's how we're looking now, and we're cleaning up some of these different oil spills using those same microbes that are in the Gulf of Mexico. These microbes that love the raw oil, okay? But we're not ready. We're absolutely not ready. Remember, they have to remove 40 million tons of overlying rock just to reach the copper. Think about the lithium mining that has to happen and where it's happening. Think about the mining of nickel up in Quebec, and how for miles around NASA uses that mine for testing space vehicles, because there is nothing alive for all of those square miles. Yeah, how about the wonderful windmills? Dead birds, bats, other endangered species killed off from those things, right? We have to be reasonable. We have to be straightforward, okay? This is nuts, absolutely nuts. You know what I'm aiming for, which is a green future with the new nuclear. And I love for us to move even further along than even the new nuclear stuff. All right, we don't have time. I'm going to get into this romance stuff and BEC, the business email compromise. Mark Ruffalo got caught up in this couple of weeks or months ago, I guess. It's absolutely incredible. But let me bring this up. This is a flashback. People have been wondering what caused that Soviet-era pipeline to explode back in 82. Do you remember that? Ronald Reagan's administration. You might not be old enough to remember. But we had 3 deep-water explosions that destroyed the Nord Stream pipelines under the Baltic Sea. Do you remember that? Yeah, not very long ago. And the Swedish seismologists reported that one of the 3 explosions measured a 2.3 on the Richter scale. That's earthquake scale, okay? But it was no earthquake. It was an explosion. So let's go back to the days of Ronald Reagan. Turns out, back in 1982, the CIA sabotaged a Soviet pipeline in Siberia. U.S. software caused the explosion in the gas pipeline that was so large it could be seen from space and put the Soviet Union out of the gas and oil business for a little while. What happened to Nord Stream? CraigPeterson.com. Well, there's a little justice here. You know what BEC is, business email compromise, romance scamming. One of these guys were just sent to prison for 25 years. So that's a good thing, right? Well, we got a couple of scam articles to talk about here. Both of these, again, in the newsletter on Monday. This one's from Sophos, who is a cybersecurity company. And then we have another one about the scam involving Mark Ruffalo from Graham Cluley. And there's a few others out there. But those are the links I sent you guys on Monday, so you knew what was going on. We're talking right now about this guy named Elvis, what is this, Ogiekpolor, I guess? He was just jailed for 25 years in Atlanta, Georgia for running, I can't even say Georgia today. So he was jailed 25 years in Atlanta for running a cybercrime group that scammed close to $10 million in under 2 years from individuals and businesses caught up in so-called romance and business email compromise scams. BEC scams are huge right now. We're going to talk about what these things are. But there's 5 other co-conspirators who seem to have worked for Elvis, and they've already pled guilty in the case, and apparently they haven't been sentenced yet. So let's talk about what this is. Business email compromise is this kind of an umbrella term for online scams where the bad guys are trying to get access to something, right? So they start with trying to find email addresses, trying to get access to the email account inside a company so that they can now send emails as someone inside the company. And fraudulent emails they send don't just seem to come from the company they're attacking, but they actually do come from them. So they use a number of different methods to do that, and they're trying to manipulate you, right? So this is kind of a spear phishing attack where they're going after specific people. And I was on TV talking about this in one particular case where one of the hosts of the news program received an email. And that email said that they wanted, and it came from someone inside the TV station, said that they wanted to have a bit of a party. And they're trying to keep it quiet, but, they're going to have everybody there. And they wanted to give away gift cards to everybody that comes. So they asked him to go ahead and buy some of these gift cards. So sure enough, they called me because I've been on their station before talking about cybersecurity, and we played with them over a course of a couple of days. I was surprised how long we could scam the scammers, but they were definitely dedicated. And what they wanted to happen is they wanted me to go to Walmart or another local store and buy a bunch of Amazon gift cards. and then come back and give them the gift card numbers and scratch off that special, ID code on the back and give them that too. And I asked them, well, why would I do that? And they said, well, because we want to make sure everyone gets the cards. It was just completely nonsensical. I asked them a whole bunch of questions, like, why would we do this? Why would we give them the cards? Why don't we just, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of strung them along for a while. I think they thought they had somebody on a hook, but they didn't. So that's the kind of scam at the low end we're talking about. On the high end, we got a call from a company that had, I think it was $80,000 that was stolen from them, basically. Again, another scam. You might be familiar with Barbara Corcoran. She is from Shark Tank, one of these investors, and she does a lot of real estate stuff. And her organization got scammed out of, what was it, $400,000, I think it was, because her bookkeeper / accountant had received this email asking for some money to be transferred in order to pay a vendor. That's usually, by the way, how that works. And Barbara was CC'd on the response, and she saw it right away and said, wait a minute, this isn't right. Called the bank and had it stopped. So she's lucky that wire didn't go through, because according to the FBI, once that money gets transferred, it takes them about 90 seconds to get it out of the reach of U.S. authorities. Now, sometimes it takes longer. There's a whole lot of mules that are used, people in the U.S. that have been scammed into, I need to move this money to my dying relative overseas, and I need a U.S. account. Have you seen any of those emails? It kind of reminds you a little bit of the Nigerian scams back in the day. Business email compromise, you might have already heard it called something like CEO fraud or CFO fraud. It's BEC is what it is, okay? So if they can get the CEO's email address or the CFO's, they're really cooking. And then here's another one. This is a lady over in Eastern Europe who made $45 million in the course of just a few days. It can all be done. We've got to be careful, because we don't want the bad guys to gain access to employees' real mailboxes, because it can cause all kinds of problems. So let's think about what's in your email. Do you have an account recovery for your email? So let's say the bad guy's in your email right now, and they're looking. They see, okay, Bank of America, let's just say. This isn't just a problem for Bank of America. This is a problem for any bank. But they're looking through. They find your bank. So they go to the bank site. They go to log in. They put in your email address, the one that they're already using, which might be your business email address. They might have gotten into let's say you have a Google email address or something else. So now they have that. They put in your email address at the bank's website, and they say, forgot password. What happens then? Is your bank going to send you a reset link to your email? Okay. They have access to your email account. They're going to get that reset link, and they're going to be able to wire money out. They can also, this one I know from, again, another client we picked up, because someone had got into their accounting records and they found all of the invoices they'd been sending out, and they changed the invoices to say the money needed to be transferred ACH'd to the bad guy's bank account and resent all of the invoices. So the people get the invoices, they say payment terms, okay, new account, no problem, we'll transfer it over there. They can find out while looking through your email when large payments are due, which suppliers or customers are involved, okay? Or they can reply to worried colleagues who might ask, hey, is this real? Are we really going to have this party? Tell colleagues who are suspicious not to contact IT or security operations. Deleting fake emails from the sent folder so the genuine user never sees them. matching the style of the genuine user by just copying and pasting stuff the real person, the genuine user, has been sending to other people from the sent box. Persuading the other party here that they're trying to con by using your email address to treat the request as confidential. Defrauding customers of the company. It goes on and off. That's how this guy made $10 million. It's crazy. So the Department of Justice here in their report said, at the trial, the jury heard from several businesses representing just a small sample of the total number of companies defrauded who had been victimized by spoof emails. In each case, the victim business believed it was making a payment, often several hundreds of thousands of dollars, to a long-standing vendor, only to subsequently learn that they'd been tricked into sending the money to an account controlled by Elvis and thereby defrauded. Now, romance scams are really sad. You know, obviously, businessman, people lose their businesses over stuff like this. All the cash out of your operating account, are you kidding? In fact, that one company that I mentioned earlier that had the $80,000 taken from their operating account, they went so far as to go over to China, actually it was Hong Kong, to file a police report. More money's been stolen. Of course, they're not getting a dime back, never did. So a romance scam is targeting individuals rather than companies, but they can still be very lucrative. Remember I mentioned Mark Ruffalo here earlier? This is the guy who played the Hulk. Well, here we go. Fraudsters are now pretending to be Jason Statham as well. I really like him, right? Incredible Hulk actor Mark Ruffalo. Here's a case where this manga artist, I had to look that up. It's a Japanese style of artistry. Chikei ID, I guess is how you pronounce it, received an unsolicited message via Facebook from somebody claiming to be Ruffalo. With help from some translation software, an initially skeptic ID responded to the Hollywood actor attaching a photo of herself. Flattered by phony Ruffalo's response, she shared details of her private life and personal struggles. Mark Ruffalo's response? I will never make you feel sad. So an American friend of hers questioned whether the person claiming to be Ruffalo was genuine, noting that whoever was responding to her wrote like somebody who doesn't speak English. And then she received a 30-second video call that blew away any of the suspicions she had left. She said, I'm sure it was Mark himself who was behind the screen chatting with me. It was a deep fake video. Her romantic feelings towards this imposter intensified as she was talking to him, and the couple ended up marrying online. So the fake Ruffalo began to complain of financial problems, asked her to wire $1,000 for a plane ticket. Each time, the supposed Ruffalo promised to pay her back, asking for more and more money. She ended up giving him over $500,000, and no, she never met the man who had defrauded her out of $500,000. Isn't that something? Be careful out there. Make sure you get my newsletter. This was in this week's newsletter. Protect yourself, protect your family, protect your business. CraigPeterson.com. Take care, guys. Well, they did it. No longer called Build Back Better, but another part of this is called the CHIPS Act. And government's coming for our wallets again, and it's going to make things worse. Yeah, for chips. The semiconductor industry has been hit hard by the lockdown. Of course, it just totally destroyed supply chains all over the world. Makes me wonder if this wasn't intentional, but we are dependent on not just U.S. manufacturers for things like our cars, through our computers, through harvesting machines that farmers need. We are dependent on foreign nations to make our chips, our chipsets. That's kind of a bad thing when you consider right now there is a whole lot of stuff going on over there in the South China Sea, which of course is where what is made? You've probably heard about this before, where in fact most of our chips are made, at least the higher tech chips. That's a bad thing. Because that means that a place like Taiwan, which has had serious problems with water shortages, and you need a lot of water in order to make chips, it has had all kinds of political instability. Of course, they had the same lockdown messes that the rest of the world had, and that just really messed them up. And then you look at what we did. You had the companies like Ford and GM. I'm mentioning these guys because they're the obvious ones, right? Chrysler, who all said, oh, people aren't going to buy cars, so we're going to cut back our orders. And remember the whole just-in-time thing? Back in the 70s, I remember this ever so well. It was like, wow, Japan, they are the model of world economies. We've got to copy everything that they do over there in Japan. And the big thing that we took from that was just-in-time inventory. Oh my gosh, I mean, I don't have to have a warehouse with parts and order a train load at a time. I can just order as many as I need and have them arrive just in time. I was watching a documentary on Volkswagen, who has, I guess it's the biggest factory in the world. This thing's absolutely amazing. And while they're assembling the cars, the parts that are needed show up just in time. There will be parts that show up that morning from subcontractors, and then they move through their systems there at the factory, and then they end up right there at the person who needs to install it minutes before it's needed. Now, that's kind of cool because it cuts down on your costs. It lets you change a vendor if you need to change a vendor. If you don't like some parts, you don't have to, get rid of a whole trainload or return them all. You just have to return that day. But it introduces some very serious problems, especially when there are supply chain problems. We've been living in a world that has just been very, very easy. I'm not going to say it's too easy, but it's been very easy. We don't have so many of the problems that we used to have way back when, like, 50 years ago, really? We have these problems where we do a lockdown, where a country locks down. Let's say Taiwan locked down and we didn't, and we tried to manufacture things. You wouldn't be able to. And part of the theory behind the way we interact with other countries is that it will prevent war. You see, if we're a completely separate country and we decide that, just leave us alone, and let's say China decided that they wanted some of our territories or some of their neighbors over there in the South China Sea, etc., China could just go in and do it. But if we're trading partners, if they rely on us in order to keep their economy going, then we're not going to go to war with them, and they're not going to go to war with us because we both need each other. That's been a mantra now for quite a few decades with countries worldwide. Of course, Ukraine and Russia are an interesting combination because Russia needs Ukraine for quite a number of different supplies, food and other things. And Ukraine needs, to a lesser extent, Russia as well as a market. But it provides food for a worldwide market. It's kind of crazy. But that's been the theory. The theory is, well, let's bring everyone close together. We'll put our hands together. We'll lock them and we'll sing, I want the world to buy a Coke, right? Or whatever that song was. You'll probably remember that song, everyone standing around in the circles, or all the way around the world. Now, it's a nice theory, and I like it. I like the fact we haven't gone to war, even though we've got I guess you could definitely call it a European war going on. But in fact, it does cause these types of problems we're seeing. We copied the Japanese just-in-time inventory, and that messed things up because those parts are not arriving when they're supposed to be arriving, and you no longer have a warehouse full of parts. So now you just can't can't do anything, right? Now you're in really ultimately big trouble. So what's happening now is Congress decided to pass I think they're calling it, what was it, a Deficit Reduction Act or something instead of Build Back Better. Because, inflation, that's what it was. Yeah, this is going to get rid of inflation because we're increasing taxes. And I don't get it. Why would Congress think that increasing taxes would bring more money into their coffers? Every time it's been done, yeah, there's a little bit of a bump initially, but then it drops off dramatically. If you want to increase revenue to the federal government, you lower taxes. Every time that's been tried, pretty much, it's absolutely worked by lowering taxes, because now people aren't trying to hide the money. They aren't doing things like moving their businesses out of the country. Even Canada and the rest of Europe has lower corporate tax rates, and that's part of what they're going for. But the manipulation that appears to have happened here is that they wanted to pass this CHIPS Act. And the CHIPS Act is another example of the federal government helping special interest groups at the expense of you and I, the expense of the taxpayers. So this special interest group came to them and they carved out some 50-something billion dollars. I think it was, $52 billion in grants and $24 billion in tax credits to the U.S. semiconductor industry. Now, at first glance, you look at that and say, well, okay, that's actually really good, because what can happen here is the semiconductor industry can use that money to build plants here in the U.S., to build fabs, chip fabrication plants. I know I can talk. And yeah, they probably could, and that could be a very, very good thing. But the devil is in the details. Yes, what else is new here, right? So this last-minute bipartisan agreement that they agreed they weren't going to do Build Back Better because of what Manchin had said, right? I'm not going to support that because it's just going to increase inflation and increase our debt. And by the way, our federal government income is barely going to be enough to just cover the interest payments on the debt. No principle at all, which is an incentive for the federal government to cause inflation, because then the federal government can pay back that debt with inflated dollars that cost them less, and then there goes the debt, right? And they can talk about how great it was. But if you're retired, if you're looking at your retirement accounts, with the type of inflation we have, which isn't the 9 point whatever that they've claimed. In reality, if you use the same methods and metrics that were used in the 1980s, where they're saying, oh, it's been 50 years, 40 years since we had this type of inflation. No. We have never, ever had this type of inflation in modern America, ever. Because, in fact, the inflation rate, if you use, again, those same net metrics, is supposedly in the 20% range. So what that means is the federal government's able to pay you back 20% less than they actually borrowed from you because of that inflation. It's just incredible. So here we go. Some $77 billion going to the U.S. semiconductor industry. But there's another little trick here that they played on all of us. And that is the lobbyists from the semiconductor industry, who, by the way, themselves are spending tens of billions of dollars to build new fabs, new plants. They're spending it out of their own pockets, not out of our pockets already, okay? But they lobbied, and Chuck Schumer introduced a cute little thing. The bill had said, yeah, we have to use this money for American interest, basically. So he removed that. So now, yeah, those tax dollars that are supposed to rebuild our chip industry, they can be used to help China. Yes, indeed. They have already penciled in some of that $77-ish billion to go to China. Yeah, isn't that great? I thought China was part of what we're trying to protect ourselves from here. Certainly not as a hot war sort of a thing, but frankly as our biggest competitor in the world. It is incredible. The U.S. share of chip manufacturing globally has dropped from 12% from 37% just 30 years ago. Okay, so we've lost 2/3 of our prowess, if you will, on the world market in making chips. Hey, you should have received this on, when was it this week? Wednesday, Tuesday. My weekly insider show notes. There's links to a great article in here from the semiconductor industry themselves talking about what is going on, what really happened. And don't worry, it's only more than $1 trillion. And then this on top of it, it's only another $250 billion. Don't worry about it. You'll be able to pay it back. Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of digital exhaust. It's kind of a new term, and it's talking about the things we leave behind. The cookie crumbs, if you will. Not cookies and browsers, but that's part of it. We're going to talk about the browser you're using and the search engine. We have a lot of choices when it comes to browsers. We've talked about it before, and if you'd like a copy of my browser special report, of course, it's free. I wouldn't mention it if it wasn't here. And you can just get it by emailing me, me@craigpeterson.com. You actually can't just get it. I'll be glad to email it to you, or we'll have Mary or Karen send it on off to you. me@craigpeterson.com. Well, people have been worried about their data. Many of us have been worried a very long time. And then remember the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal? You know, it's amazing to me how stuff gets politicized. I'm shaking my head. I just can't believe people. Because Barack Obama got everything on everyone on Facebook for his campaign. Not a beep. Nothing. Nothing. He had everything on everybody. And Cambridge Analytica, and it was just given to him, by the way. And then Cambridge Analytica decided, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make this little program. People can play it. We will advertise on Facebook, and then we'll gather data on people who are there on Facebook, and we'll use it for Orange Man Bad. Trump. Yeah, this will be great. And so the exact opposite of what they did with President Obama when he got all this information on tens of millions, I think it was actually hundreds of millions of people, they decided this was bad. And they started making a big deal about it. And so a lot of people at that point decided, hey, what's happening here? What is going on? Would they have my information? Because remember, this is an old adage. You've heard it a million times by now, but it bears repeating. If you're not paying for something, you or your information are the product. And that's exactly true. Exactly true. If you're using Google Maps, for instance, to get around, to do your GPS navigation, you are the product. Because Google is selling information. They collect information, right? That's what they do. And you might have noticed recently, you probably got an email from Google saying, we're going to be flushing your location, or at least some of your location information soon. Did you get that email from Google? I got it, right? And I don't use Google very much, but I obviously I need to. I need to know about Google. Google's good for certain things, and I understand what it's doing. But it decided all of a sudden after the, again, left stuff, right? People were all worried that because there was no longer a national law on abortion. By the way, there never has been a national law on abortion. And in fact, that's what the Supreme Court said. You can't make up a law in the court. You can rule on the application of the law in the court. They've stepped over that boundary and decided they can rule on whether or not there should be a law. And so the court said, hey, listen, this is at this point a states' rights issue, right? The 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The state should decide this. And the Congress didn't act. There's no federal law about this. So these rulings were bad. And people say, oh, no, that's terrible. It's the first time it's ever happened. No, there have been over 200 times where the Supreme Court changed its mind. Think of the Dred Scott decision, if you even know what that is. Well, you guys do, because you're the best and brightest, but these people complaining probably have no clue about any of this stuff, right? None at all. So they're all upset because now, oh my gosh, my golly, because Roe v. Wade, etc., was overturned, now they're going to be tracking me because my data is being sold. Because remember, that's how they came after these January 6th protesters, right, that were down in Washington, D.C., by using the GPS data that came from the apps that were there on their phones. Yeah, and that's also how it was proven that the election may have been stolen, but certainly had substantial fraud, because they were able to buy the data, look at the data, show what was pretty obviously the acts of at least 1,000 people that were completely illegal in ballot harvesting and ballot box stuffing. Right? So again, GPS data, you can buy it. The federal government's not allowed to keep data on us. It's not allowed to spy on the citizens at all, right? So what do? They go to these same data brokers and they buy the data. So now, well, we're not tracking the people. Are you kidding me? We would never do that. But they're buying the tracking data from third parties. So they are tracking. Oh, no, it's not us. It's other people. So now they're worried, well, if I go to an abortion clinic, are the state's attorneys general that do not allow abortions in their states, where the law does not allow it, are they going to buy data and see that I went to an abortion clinic, even if I went to an abortion clinic out of state? Now, you can see their concern on that one, right? So again, now all of a sudden they're worried about tracking data. I just don't understand why they trust the government on one hand and don't trust it on another hand. I guess that's what people say, right? The ability to hold two conflicting thoughts as truth in your mind at the same time. But they're concerned, and it's legitimate. So what happens? Google decides we're not going to keep location data on you, and that way none of the attorneys general can ask us for it or subpoena it, because we just don't have it. And that was all because of the overturn of the court ruling on abortion, the federal court. So to me, it's just so disingenuous for these people to only care about privacy when it's about them. And I just don't understand it. My mother is that same way. I know she doesn't listen to this, so I can say that. But it's absolutely incredible to me that happens. So what do you use? There's a number of major search engines in the world. Really, what you're looking at is Google. It's like the 800-pound gorilla out there. And then you also have Bing, Microsoft search engine. There have been a few that have come and gone. There's some that I liked better. Like I loved Alta Vista much better. Because it had Boolean algebra operations that you could do much better than Google. So I've ended up with Devon Think that I use now for searching if I need to get real fancy searches going on. But I got to mention DuckDuckGo. Now, it got a bit of a black eye recently, but the reality is if you want to keep your searches private, DuckDuckGo is the way to go. Well, we talked about the top 100 hospitals in the country and how they were tracking you using Facebook or Google trackers, cookies. And they would know, oh, you just registered an appointment with an oncologist or whatever it might be, right? Which is private information. DuckDuckGo does not have any trackers on it. They do not keep a history of what you've been searching for, and they do not sell that stuff to advertisers. Now, behind DuckDuckGo is Bing. but Bing does not get access to you. Only DuckDuckGo does, and they don't keep any of that. So check it out online. That kid's game we used to play, DuckDuckGo.com. Obviously, I don't make any money off of that. Oh, and by the way, they have apps for Android and iOS and browser extensions. I got a question from a parent whose son was serving over in the Middle East, and they were asking what was a safe messaging app to use, and they asked about WhatsApp. So we're going to talk about that right now. There are a lot of different messaging apps that people are using, and they all have different features, right? They have different ways of doing things. And the top are WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. Why would anyone use that? WeChat, again, why would anyone use that? Viber, Line, Telegram, and IMO, which I'm not familiar with. This is according to Inc. magazine, the top 7 messenger apps in the world. So why would people use those? Okay, so let's just talk about them very briefly. The 2 top ones in my mind that I want to talk about. But WhatsApp has 2 billion active users. It's the number 1 messaging app, followed by WeChat, which is a Chinese messaging app with 1.2 billion users. And WeChat is also used to make payments, and they've got this whole social credit system in China where they are tracking you, deciding whether or not you posted something or said something in a chat that they don't like, and so you can't get on the train to get to work, and you lose your job, right? Yeah, they do that regularly, and there are people in the U.S. here that are trying to do very similar things. This Congress has not been the best, let me put it that way. So should you use that WeChat? Now, obviously, no. The next one is Facebook Messenger, also called Messenger by Meta, and it has close to 1 billion users. And again, they are watching you. They are spying on you. They are tracking what you do. WhatsApp, I use for one of my masterminds. The whole group is in on WhatsApp, and I'm okay with that. Nothing terribly private that I'm worried about there. There are things that are said or discussed that I'm not perhaps happy that they're privy to. But in reality, WhatsApp is pretty good. Now, you have to make sure that when you're using something like WhatsApp, that you have to turn on their privacy features for end-to-end security, because that's been a historical problem with WhatsApp. Yeah, they can have end-to-end encryption, but you have to turn it on. So what is end-to-end encryption, and why does it matter? Well, end-to-end encryption means if you're sending a message to someone or multiple someones, and they obviously have to have the same app that you do, and when it gets to the other side, they can decrypt it. So anyone in the middle will just see a whole bunch of encrypted data, which just it looks like trash. If it's encrypted properly, there's no real distinguishing portions to it, if you will, or identifying factors that it's anything other than just random data. Really good encryption does that, right? It does an compression first and then messes with it. We're not going to get into how all of that works. I helped way back when to put PGP together. That's Phil Zimmerman's Pretty Good Privacy. I actually still use some of that stuff today. And then PGP became GPG, which is the GNU Privacy, GPG, and is well worth it as well. But that's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about regular messaging apps that regular people can use. I do use GPG, by the way. Those of you who email me at craigpeterson.com, if it's actually me responding to you, it will be a message that's cryptographically signed by GPG so that you can verify that it was me and it wasn't Mary or it wasn't Karen. So I do that on purpose as well. All right, I'm sorry, wandering around a little bit here. WhatsApp is pretty commonplace and is pretty good. Well, WhatsApp, as I mentioned, end-to-end encryption, but it's using the encryption from another project that's out there, and this is an open source project called Signal. If you want to be secure end-to-end, if you don't want to leave any digital exhaust around, use Signal. It's very, very good. What is his name? Moxie Marlinspike is the guy that founded it. He ran that company for quite a while. It's a foundation. And as I recall, early 2022, he stepped down as the head of that foundation, and other people have taken over. But he's even threatened to, and I assume he actually did, build in some things into Signal that will make some of these Israeli programs that are used to crack into cell phones, it'll make them fail. They'll crash because of bugs, and again, that's not what we're talking about right now. But Signal, again, if you're going to send a message, just like with WhatsApp, the other person, the receiver, has to have Signal on their device. Signal's available for smartphones, again, Android and iOS. You know what I feel about Android, which is don't use it. You're much better off, if you don't have much of a budget, buying an older model iPhone. They're going to be a lot safer for you. So Signal will also run on your Windows computer or your Mac. The same thing with WhatsApp, by the way. So WhatsApp, more common, not the worst thing in the world for privacy. Signal, less common, and definitely very good for privacy. Now, I mentioned Apple here. I use Macs, and I have ever since they switched over to Unix base. They actually put a mock microkernel and FreeBSD userland and kernel on top of the mock microkernel. So if you're a total geek, you know what I'm talking about. But it's designed to be safe and secure from the beginning, whereas with Windows and with Android, it was shoehorned in. The security, the privacy, right? It just wasn't there. So what should you do? Well, as I mentioned, you should be using Apple iOS devices. I'm not the world's Apple fan, okay? Don't get me wrong, but they are a lot more secure, and the Macs are also very secure. Again, nothing's perfect. They have not been attacked as much as Windows computers because, of course, Windows is more common. But having worked in the kernel and the network stack on both Windows, the actual kernel, the actual source code of Windows, and Linux, and BSD, and System 5, so all of the major core Linux distributions over the decades, I can tell you that the Unix world is far, far more secure. Now, you don't have to worry about it. People look at it and say, well, what should I use? Well, if you're a geek, you should probably be using Linux. I do use Linux, but I will admit my main workstation is a 10-year-old Mac Pro. 10 years old. How long do your Windows machines last, right? And it's still working great for me. Very fast still. It's a great little machine. And we still have Mac laptops that are 20 years old. So they are designed and made to last. Same thing with the phones. But they can be more expensive. So look at refurbed. Look at older models because it will save you money. You can be in the same price range as Windows. You can be in the same price range as Android. And you can have much, much better privacy and security. We're going to talk about electric vehicles right now and what the Wall Street Journal is calling the upside-down logic of electric SUVs. And you know what? I agree with them here. But where are electric vehicles today and where are they going? Electric vehicles are an interesting topic because in reality, we're not ready for them. Our grid is not set up to handle electric vehicles. We are crazy what we're doing right now, shutting down power plants. Germany is bringing nuclear plants that they had shut down back online. They're not fools. Nuclear is the cleanest right now source that we can possibly get. Don't fool yourselves by listening to people that tell you that, for instance, the solar cells you put on your roof are green, because they are not. Highly toxic. The manufacturing, distribution, and disposal of those things. California, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, has a huge problem now because 90% of those solar panels on people's roofs are ending up in landfills and are leaking toxic metals into what little underground water supply California still has left. And that's not just true of California, that's everywhere. So we're depending on more electricity when we actually have less electricity. We're shutting things down. Look at Texas, right? We're trying to be green. People complain about Texas being conservative. It's not. It's just very independent. They have their own electric grid, the only state in the nation that has its own electric grid that's not tied in to anybody else. The whole rest of the country is composed of two grids. So if one state isn't producing quite enough, they can potentially buy it from another one. Here in the Northeast, we bring some of the power down from Hydro-Québec, là-bas, le nord, over there in the north, right? From the LG projects that they have up there. Of course, it's from hydroelectric dams. But we exchange it all. We move it back and forth. But we're shutting down some of these relatively clean sources of energy, even coal now with all of the scrubbers and stuff. But if you look at nuclear, particularly the new nuclear, it is as safe, it's far safer than burning natural gas that so many grids burn. Look in New Hampshire, it doubled the cost of electricity in New Hampshire, because we didn't bring on the second nuclear reactor in Seabrook, right? And we're burning natural gas to generate most of our electricity. It doubled. It's absolutely crazy. The cost, the things that are happening in Washington and locally, like in New Hampshire, like in Texas, like in so many other states, are making our lives much worse. And to top it all off, now they're pushing electric vehicles, which again are not green. They are not safe. They are hazardous to the environment in so many ways, but particularly by their manufacturing. So if consumers and businesses really cared about the carbon dioxide that they're emitting, right, that greenhouse gas that's, just absolutely terrible, they might buy what? What's selling right now? Let me look. Oh, yeah. EVs, electric vehicles like Ford Mustangs, Mach-E, Hummers. EV, that's from GM. The wonderful new electric pickup from Ford. Now, these are huge vehicles. They are long-range electric vehicles, which is what we want, right? And they can be driven tens of thousands of miles before they rack up enough miles and save enough gasoline to compensate for the emissions created just to produce their batteries. And that's according to their fans. And when we're talking about the fans, their predictions, their estimates, their statistics typically are what? A little tainted, right? We talked about that earlier. Yeah. So it gets to be a problem, doesn't it? It gets to be a real problem. So what are they doing? Instead of making the small electric vehicles like the Nissan Leaf, which was a great little car. I've told the story of my neighbor who has the Leafs. He has a couple of them, and he installed a bunch of solar panels, and he uses those to charge his Leafs and to run around, because most of what driving he does, most of the driving I do, most of the driving most people do is just short range, right? It's less than 30 miles. So he loves it, right? But he's not doing it because it's green. He realizes that it harms the environment to have those solar cells, and it harms the environment to drive those electric cars that were very harmful to be made. The batteries right now from these electric cars, the outtakes, they are storing just like nuclear waste, although there's far more of it than there is the nuclear waste. A separate topic entirely, really. I guess there isn't a whole lot of correlation there, but they're not able to recycle so many of these batteries. We just don't have the technology for it. So why would you make these big electric vehicles, these sports utility vehicles, these trucks that have the long ranges, and not something that's nice and small? Think European, right? Think of the stupid car from the smart car from Mercedes, that little tiny car. That works great in European cities where you don't have a lot of space to park. The roads aren't very wide. You can kind of zoom around, zip in and out, find parking, and you're not going fast, not going far. Makes sense, right? Same thing with like a Prius with the smaller engines. And yet you see people whipping down the highway, passing me, doing the exact opposite thing that you'd think they'd want to do. You're driving a small car with a small engine. Maybe it's a hybrid, electric gas. Maybe it's a plug-in hybrid. To do what? To stop CO2, supposedly to save the environment. And yet, at the exact same time, you are causing more harm than you need to the environment by zooming down the highway. That's not what these things are made for, not what they're designed for. But that is what most people could use, and yet GM, Ford, Chrysler, none of them are making the vehicles that fit into that part of the marketplace. The other nice thing about the smaller vehicles is they don't require as long to charge, because they don't have to charge up these big battery packs, because you're not going that far. So it's less of a demand potentially on the grid. Because again, even if you drive that big electric SUV 30 miles, you're hauling around 1,000 pounds, maybe more, of batteries that you don't actually need to haul around. See, again, it goes back to how so many of us are looking at this stuff, just like the original Prius poll that I've talked about so many times, where the number one reason people said that they drove a Prius, this was some 70% of the people, was because of what they thought, the purchaser of the Prius thought other people would think about them. This is a real problem. You know, the assumption that an electric vehicle stops oil from coming out of the ground, stops natural gas from coming out of the ground, stops coal from being mined, that assumption is problematic because it is not true. And when it comes to the carbon footprint, again, obviously, the environment is changing, the temperatures are changing. It's obvious, right? Climate denier, some might call me. But it's obvious the climate's changing. It has always been changing. Mount St. Helens eruption put more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than mankind has since the beginning of time. So look at these volcanic eruptions and say, oh, okay, so we've barely scratched the surface as humankind. Far less than 1% of global warming is actually caused by humans. But it's about control. But this isn't a political show. Okay, I guess I am. So let's talk about the next article I had in my newsletter that came out this week. Again, Tuesday or Wednesday, you can sign up for it. It's absolutely free. This is my free newsletter at craigpeterson.com, or just send me an email, me@craigpeterson.com, and ask to be signed up. But it looks like President Biden is maybe thinking about going nuclear. I talked about this on the air earlier this week because there's a couple of really interesting things happening. One is the federal government has authorized some of these new nuclear technologies to go online. So they've got these different plants. There's a number of different types of plants that are out there and different technologies, but all of them hyper safe. And they are actually in small production. Pretty darn cool. The second thing, which I found particularly interesting, is that at least 3 times over the last few weeks, President Biden has talked about nuclear power, just in passing, right? I think he's trying to get his base to get used to the idea, because he's been trying to eliminate all forms of energy consumption, but he does seem to maybe favor development of nuclear power, or whoever is writing his speeches for him. You know, nuclear is carbon friendly, very carbon friendly, friendlier than windmills or solar parks, and it's a lot more reliable. So I'm happy about that. New plants coming online, just small ones, and that, frankly, is the future of nuclear, not these huge plants. And he's talking about it, so we'll see. It's absolutely green. Even, as I mentioned, Germany is bringing nuclear plants back online, and the European Union has declared that nuclear is green technology. And I'm shocked here because apparently I'm agreeing with the European Parliament. Oh, wow, what's going on? Hey, visit me online, craigpeterson.com. Make sure you get my insider show notes and the trainings that come out, craigpeterson.com.